Recovery is the thing that one principle at a time, one day at a time, uncovers and disassembles that wreckage so the goodness and the love that's already in us can find its way to the surface and be manifested in our lives.
Hey everyone, my name is Joe Pusateri and I'm living the sober life. And with me today, I got a very good friend. This is Aaron. Aaron, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Aaron Smallwood, and Joe's asked me to join him for the podcast today, and I just want you to know I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the invite. Thank you.
The identification, I think, and this is jumping around, the identification is everything. When the first people got together and kind of founded 12-step recovery, kind of stumbling and fumbling along the way, when they first came together, there was nothing innovative about their knowledge. They didn't know anything different about alcoholism as a disease than anyone else knew in the 1930s. The disease concept was not a new thing. So anyway, I think what was new was this idea of one drunk helping another drunk. And I've thought a lot about that, and I've heard a lot of people talk about it, so I probably didn't make any of this up. But what makes sense to me is that there's information that can save your life, or that can save my life. And that information could come from a pastor or a doctor or a psychologist, a counselor of some kind, a friend, a parent, somebody close to you who cares about you, and it can be the right information. Aaron, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, and the alcohol, the drugs are doing this to your body, you need to be separated from it. And even though it's the right information and it's given to us by people who love us, we won't take it, and we won't do it. And the reason we won't do it, there's a lot of reasons probably why we won't do it, but primarily I think what it boils down to is we just feel different. We feel isolated. We feel awkward in our own skin. We look at the world and we look like we don't fit into the world. And so it's like that information that comes from people out in the world doesn't feel like it's going to work, right? And then we have all kinds of reasons in our head why it won't work. Well, that doesn't make sense. I don't understand this concept. I'm different because, my case is X, Y, and Z, or I had a tough upbringing or whatever, and we just won't take the information that'll save our life. But then somebody who has been where we have been has the ability to connect, and has the ability to win our confidence, and has the ability to identify, or we have the ability to identify with them. And when that happens, it's like this channel opens up that wasn't there before. And now information that can save our life has a way, to transmit. And I think it's everything. So I think part of the way we do identify is by describing what it was like even before the first drink or a drug. It didn't fit in, felt kind of awkward, I was always restless, irritable, discontent, my mind used to race or whatever. And people describe that in different ways. But then another way we identify is what happened when we took that first drink, or what happened when we took that first drug. What was that like for you?
Well, I drank alcoholically from the beginning. Mm-hmm. I can remember, one of my first memories of drinking, I just remember I was with two of my friends, and we all bought a pint of liquor, and they sipped on theirs, and I just drank the whole thing. And then I got alcohol poisoning, and it was bad, and I was sick for days, and my parents knew, and it was just, and it was just like that for me from the beginning. I had the allergy from the beginning. And, what you were talking about before just makes so much sense to me, and I agree with it completely. I think there's something fundamental about the human spirit that we innately need to feel understood. Mm-hmm. We need to be around people who we feel like understand us. And, it's such a bizarre thing for people that don't have this disease, on the outside looking in, watching people destroy themselves the way we do. And there's a lot of people that love us that say, if you loved your kids, if you loved us, why can't you just love us enough to stop drinking? Why can't you love us enough to stop using? And so, that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to understand why someone would continue to engage in this behavior that destroys them and destroys everyone around them. And so I think when you communicate the message to an alcoholic that says, I know that your disease has prevented you from acting like you love the people in your life, but I know that you do. Mm-hmm. And I also understand what it's like to love people and for the life of you be powerless to act like it. I think it's an extremely important message. Because we suffer from this disease does not mean that we don't have love in us. It doesn't mean that we don't have goodness in our spirit. It simply means that the disease has covered that up and heaped a bunch of wreckage and pain and suffering on it. And so I really don't think, and might be a controversial statement, but I really don't think recovery makes us better people. Mm-hmm. I don't think recovery has the ability to implant goodness and love into my heart, into my spirit. Recovery is the thing that one principle at a time, one day at a time, uncovers and disassembles that wreckage so the goodness and the love that's already in us can find its way to the surface and be manifested in our lives. And so I think what you were talking about is extremely relevant, because if you can convince someone through an explanation like that you understand the problem that they have, then the solution that you offer gains instant credibility. Mm-hmm. If you can convince them, hey, I understand what it means to love people and have goodness in your heart but not be able to act like it. I know what that feels like. I found a way to bring my goodness to the surface. Are you interested in learning about that? Mm-hmm. Maybe like, yeah, I think I might be. Mm-hmm. You know?
I think the magic of the fourth step, when we take our inventory and we, through the process of looking at our resentments, and that we're able to uncover all this ugly stuff, right? And it's ugly stuff that we don't want to look at, which is evident that we don't want to look at it, because that's why we procrastinate on the fourth step, forever, or most people do, or at least I did. So we got all this ugly stuff, and we don't want to look at it because it's uncomfortable. But if you ask us why it's so hard to uncover all this, it's kind of hard to give an answer. Well, I think the real answer is because it has power over us. And the way at which it has power over us, and I'm talking about fear, anxiety, the things that we've done, the things that we've felt, the things that we've believed, the mistakes that we've made, the regrets that we have, we have somehow, at a subconscious level, I don't think we think this up here, but at a subconscious level, we believe that this is who we really are. We are this big amalgam of mistakes.
Absolutely.
That's our identity, right? And so we come to believe we're bad people, I feel I want to love my family. Mm-hmm. They want me to love them. I seem incapable of being able to show this love I have. I must not. To my horror, I must not, despite the fact that I think that I do and I want to, which is this weird thing. So we believe that all this garbage is who we are. No wonder we want to keep it buried. No wonder we don't want to think about it. No wonder we don't want to look at it. No wonder we don't want to do our fourth step. But when we pull it all to the surface, and more importantly, when we sit down and we talk about it with somebody else, it doesn't go away. It isn't all resolved. We don't figure it all out, but we get space, right? We get this much space between us and it. And if there's space, then one thing is for sure is that I'm not that, right? Because there's some space in between me and if I was it, then there wouldn't be any space. But once I get it out of me and put it on the table, metaphorically, put it on paper, literally, talk about it with somebody else, suddenly that's not who I am. That's just stuff I've done. And that's liberating, because then the question is, maybe, what am I? Maybe I am capable of love. Maybe I am capable of being a good person. Like you said, maybe there is something redeemable in there, some love in there that can be manifest and come to the surface. And that was my experience doing the fourth and fifth step. And I think that it's so important that we do that so we can find out that we're good people, or we're at least not, I think we're all good people, but we're at least not the monsters we thought we were. At the very least, we're not that, and then the process of discovery who we really are, of course, is the work of more steps and more recovery. So tell me about, what you do and why you do it, and, what you're involved in, what life is like in recovery, that kind of stuff.
So a couple of years ago, I became a certified alcohol and drug counselor. So
Mm-hmm.
I've worked as a therapist in this field for a bit, and then recently I took a position as the administrator of a residential treatment program. So, there's no. I think one of the things that makes me feel connected, or one of the things that really provides nutrition for my spirit is, I've not forgotten, and I hope I don't forget. When you look at an addict who's early in recovery or fresh in recovery, there's a look in their eyes, there's a look on their face where you can see a pain and a brand of suffering that looks very familiar to you because you used to live in that dark place. And so that really resonates with me when I see someone suffering like that. And I don't think there's any greater privilege than to work with people who are in that position and do what you can to try to facilitate change in their lives. Of course, it has to come from them, but we can be facilitators in that process. And then to slowly watch that look of emptiness and disconnection and hopelessness evaporate or dissipate and be replaced by a look of hope and by a look of belonging and by a look of connection. I just don't think there's any greater privilege than that, to be able to get to do that for a living. So that's why I do what I do. I don't see myself ever doing anything different. I mean, I can't predict the future, but I know that my active alcoholism and addiction, I was like a dry leaf in the wind. I was blowing around whatever way life and my disease, directed me. I had no purpose. I had no direction. My life had no substance. And so I firmly believe that in recovery, I have to find that. I have to find something that gives my life purpose, that brings meaning to my life. And what I do for a living certainly does that for me. I mean, it's not my recovery, but to say that it doesn't help me in my recovery is just incorrect. It does all of those things for me.
Have you had a spiritual experience or anything you would describe as a spiritual experience in your time in recovery?
Certainly. I think that one of the most important things in life, or not just in life, but just as a human being, is, to always be willing to change our mind in the face of evidence about any topic. And so I'm always saying, and I firmly believe, that the disease of addiction is a disease of perception. It gives me a certain set of lenses to look through at the world, and it really shows me all of the darkness, and it shows me all of the negative things about myself, and it shows me all the negative things about people. And the disease shows me all the negative things about the world. So every single time, recovery has contributed to giving me a different set of lenses to look through, where I can start to see the positive in myself, or see the positive in humanity, or see the positive in the world around me. That's a spiritual experience to me. I mean, there are a lot of bad things in the world, but there's a lot of beauty too. And I think most human beings lose sight of the fact that we do, to some degree, have control over maybe not about what we see, but what we notice. There's beauty there if we allow ourselves to see it. And every time my world is opened up to being able to see beauty that I've never noticed before, then that's a spiritual experience to me.
That's awesome. So what does a sober life look like to you?
When I think about that question, I think about the difference between I have to and I get to. And I think that there's a lot of people running around in the world today, right at this moment, as you and I speak about this today, doing all the things that they have to do. They're taking their kids to ball practice. They're going to work. They're coming home. They're running errands. They're cooking dinner. They're doing all these things that they have to do to get by. And I think when you've lived in the place that you and I lived, all of the have-tos get transformed into I get to. I know what it's like. I've got a little boy. He's 15. He's 15 years old, and I know what it's like to not be the father that I want to be. So all the time I get to spend with him doing the things, there are things that I get to do. I get to pick him up. I get to take him where he wants to go. I get to buy him this. I get to spend time with him. I get to go on a big canoe trip. And so I think it's just, that's the gift of perspective, is all of the things that I'm doing in my life today are just typically things ordinary people get to do. I go to work. I try to be of service to other human beings. I try to be a positive presence in the world. I try to be of service. And then I just try to keep it in perspective and realize that I'm playing with house money.
Mm-hmm.
We are, Joey, we're playing with house money. And that's the gift of perspective, is to be able to see that clearly.
And sometimes I wish it was more often, because a lot of times if I'm just going through life, I get caught up in all the stuff. But every once in a while it'll hit me. It's like I should be dead, and that's not a funny thing to say. Like, I should literally be dead, and I can identify dates and times and situations where that absolutely could have or should have happened. At the very least, I've done plenty to get locked up for a very, very long time. So the fact that I'm free and the fact that I'm alive, should put everything into perspective. Like, who cares about whatever they're arguing on, the television, the news, or whatever? Like, who cares who your buddy voted for, or what? Whatever, fill in the blank on whatever people get outraged about. It's like, I'm alive, man. Like, I'm alive. Every breath that I take is a gift. And like, if I've been given this gift, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to just sit around and complain because I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough, whatever. I don't get to, do all the things I see people on TV doing, or am I going to sit and complain about how the world's falling apart and, or get bitter and angry because not enough people like me? Like, who cares? Like, I'm alive. Like, I just want to, everything I want to do out of that gratitude. Well, this might be a non sequitur, but I really think that what recovery has given me is an experience of what real love is. And actually I was inspired, these thoughts that I had kind of were inspired by something you went through, and we were talking about this the other day, about the links that your sponsor went to help get you to meetings, driving with, how many miles was it, did we figure out?
It was 60 or 70 miles if you added it all up.
Yeah. So like between going from where he lived to where you lived, which was backtracking the wrong direction from where the meeting was, which is this direction, and then take you back home. And then when he went back home, all together is 60, 70 miles. Right. And that sounds crazy, and if at the very least it sounds like you owe him, like he's gone to such great lengths, by gosh, Aaron, you owe him, you better do what he wants you to do. And that's not what the motivation is at all. He did it because that's just what we do. That is what we do in recovery, and it's a joy, and hopefully it helps somebody to do that. Sometimes it doesn't, but even when it doesn't, we still get something out of the experience of trying to help somebody. It helps keep us sober, and it helps pay a debt that we can never pay back for people who did that kind of stuff for us. When I was thinking about that, and I was talking to a friend today, we have a saying, of course, in the rooms, like, don't leave before the miracle happens. Mm-hmm. And I think I've realized what that means. It's like, don't leave before you figure out how much you're loved. Like when a new person comes in, like, I just want to grab him or her and say, listen, we love you so much in ways that you do not understand. And we'll do anything it takes, to help you get this message. And you don't even know what that means yet, but if you stick around, you'll figure it out. You'll understand. And the love has no strings. It's got no agenda. We have no expectations. Like, we just want to give you this love because that's what love wants to do. And it's not transactional. We're not getting anything out of it, and we're not giving anything to you through it. We're just experiencing this together, because that kind of love is the only thing that heals this disease. You know what I mean?
I absolutely agree. And I think that's why early recovery is so difficult for people, because you come in and, the love that's in you, or the goodness that's in your spirit, is covered up by so much wreckage and so much pain and so much guilt and shame that it doesn't just find its way into the world out from underneath all of that wreckage. It takes time to learn and develop the skills and practice principles and do all the things that recovery does in order to sort of clear some of that debris out of the way. And so basically, I think what happens is, you come in, it's usually some catastrophe that happens. I mean, almost every attempt at recovery is sort of preceded by some catastrophe. It's not like we just travel through the world and everything's beautiful and we just decide, well, I'm going to stop drinking. I'm an alcoholic.
Right.
Some huge, like, giant, catastrophic event happens, and then we emerge, and then there's a window of willingness or desperation. And so, I just think it's a really difficult thing to. Now I don't have the alcohol and drugs, but I don't have anything in its place yet. And so all of the things that I was trying not to feel and all the things that I'm running from are now sitting directly in my lap, and I have no relief. And I think people simply get discouraged, or they have a slip, or they're hanging around the wrong people, or whatever reason, and then that window of opportunity closes, and then they're on till the next time. And that's what makes this disease so dangerous, because you drink and use, and then some catastrophe happens, and then you have a window of opportunity to get clean. And if it doesn't work, then you drink and use until another catastrophe happens, and then you have a window of opportunity to get. But sometimes that catastrophe is death. Sometimes that big event is you succumb to this disease before you develop the brand of desperation or willingness that recovery requires. You can't give this thing a half-hearted effort. And I mean, I think that's why, some of the literature says, half measures availed us nothing. And that's what I tell my clients a lot. And so the equation there is 50% equals 0. That's what I tell them. And so that's why, what we're doing today, what we've devoted our lives to doing is so important, because people underestimate the gravity of this disease. I mean, it's life and death.
Absolutely. And I've heard it said, half measures availed us nothing. Somebody said, well, it's like if you just use half the ingredients for a cake, you're not going to get half a cake. You're going to get a big mess. And at first I was like, no, if you cut all the ingredients in half, you'll get half a cake. And then I thought, no, I'm thinking about the wrong way. Like, if there's 10 ingredients and I only take 5 of them, I ain't going to get half a cake. I'm going to get a mess. And that's definitely true. And I see it again and again and again. People will come into the program and they'll start working 12-step recovery, or they don't start working it yet, but they've got some fellowship. They're going to some meetings. They're not pouring poison into their body, and they start to feel good. And maybe they're feeling good because they're starting to do some of the right things. But because this thing hasn't clicked yet, they feel good, so they stop doing the things that they were doing because they're like, well, I don't need to do these things because I feel good. So they stop doing what's working, and then lo and behold, they go out and get drunk, and they're, either conclude, well, this stuff doesn't work, or they're just baffled. I don't know why this happened. And sometimes they don't make it back because, if it's not the shame or the remorse or the guilt or whatever, it could just be death. That's a good reason, or that's one of the reasons people don't make it back. But, if we can, get people to kind of hang on long enough, and begin to put these habits into their life in this window and express some willingness to take some action even before they understand it, even before they maybe even believe that it's going to work or know why they're doing it, then hopefully we can capitalize on that window of opportunity and instill some recovery in there.
I think the point you brought up is an important one too. And I think one of the most dangerous periods of recovery is that moment where it starts to get better. And so, like we were talking about earlier, you bring this wound into recovery with you. And sometimes the closing of that wound can be really scary for people. And I spent a lot of time thinking about why that is. When our wound starts to heal, why does it scare us so much? And I think because that's at that moment when the wound starts to close up, there's a sort of a vacuum that happens. And so now all of my attention and all of my time and all of my vital energy that was devoted to using and scheming and trying to get more and feed this disease and doing all the things that comes with that, now I have all of this emptiness, because now that stuff doesn't exist and is no longer part of my life, and I really don't know what to do with myself. And so in the absence of all that, now I stand in this place where I don't have anything to occupy every moment of of time in my head, and which is obviously the worst place for an addict to be. That is the critical moment, I think, where every addict in recovery must begin the process by which they hammer out, what am I going to do to provide purpose and meaning and direction in my life? And I think people who fail to do that are overcome by that emptiness. And of course, what happens when alcoholics and addicts feel emptiness for too long? Well, I mean, we know. We all know one way, tried and true, to relieve ourselves of the emptiness and the negative emotions that we experience. And even though it doesn't work for long and it's fleeting and it's not real, it seems to work for the moment.
And the human mind is pretty interesting, and particularly a damaged alcoholic mind. I was watching something today, actually, a YouTube video, and it was about solitary confinement, I think. And part of this program kind of went into the psychology of boredom. And so they were showing a psychological experiment where they had a guy come in, and he was under the pretenses that he was there for some experiment that was not what they were really testing for. And so he comes in, and there's like this button or whatever on the table, and they say, this button, gives you an electric shock. Go ahead and try it. And he hits it, and he's like, very painful. And somebody comes in and goes, would you like to touch that again? And he's like, no, like it hurts. Like, I don't want to touch that thing again. They're like, okay, all right. Well, the next part of the, experiment, you need to go into this room and wait. And we'll be back in a half an hour. And there's nothing in the room. There's a chair and a little table and that button. And they're timing to see how long it takes. I mean, if he touches it again, but they're timing to see how long it takes for him to touch it again. Just out of boredom, will this person willingly give himself pain, physical pain, out of boredom, because boredom is so unbearable. And sure enough, it was a minute and a half until he touched the darn thing again. 30 seconds he's looking at it again, he's looking all around, and you can tell he's just bored out of his mind. 30 seconds in, he's looking at it, and a minute and a half later he touches it again, and then another 6 minutes or something, I think, he touches it again. And they come in, they're like, so why did you touch it again? He's like, I don't know. It's just bored. Being bored is so excruciating. We would rather give ourselves physical pain just for the stimulus.
That actually...
That makes sense to people like us.
Well, I almost hate to admit it, but it does make sense.
Heck yeah.
And, I think that to some degree and I don't know if this is true for everybody, but I know it was true for me. I think at some point, along the road of my recovery, when things started to get better, I think this happens to a lot of people. Sometimes we're unwilling to let go of our own pain. Mm-hmm. Because it's so familiar. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you live in that dark world, in that world of suffering and isolation for so long, it becomes familiar to the point where you don't know what to do without it. And I think in my opinion, that's why a lot of people don't make it, because when that wound starts to close up, it's just scary. Mm-hmm. And also, I think sometimes our wound is directly proportional to how much drugs and alcohol have to offer us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we're not. I think some of us are not willing to let go of our pain and our emptiness and our suffering simply because we're not really ready to let go of that thing we love, which gives us escape from it. And so, the charm has to wear off. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you this. There was a point in my drinking and using career where the charm wore off. And it was no longer working for me. And I became so beaten down under the lash of our alcoholism. Mm-hmm. We were driven to recovery, mm-hmm. and there we discovered the fatal nature of our condition. Then and only then do we become as willing to listen and open to conviction as the dying can be. And we stand ready to do anything which will lift the merciless obsession from us. And I can tell you that is the place I came to. I had had lots of lashes, and the disease had taken everything away from me. It destroyed all my relationships. It took all my material possessions, although, that was the thing of least value that it took from me. And it brought me to a place where I could no longer laugh or cry. I could no longer experience either joy or sadness in a genuine human way. I was completely broken as an individual. And, I'm grateful for that moment. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I hope I never forget it, because that was the moment where surrender happened for me. And I became desperate and willing to do anything I had to do to overcome this disease.
And what was that?
Well, number one, I had to first accept what is so devastating to the addict ego. I cannot overcome this on my own. I mean, we are defiant by our very nature. You know this. We do not I have never met a single addict who didn't have a problem with authority. Not one.
I don't think I have either.
Never have. I don't suspect I ever will. And so, I think that we have to be convinced once and for all and finally that, okay, I have a problem that I cannot fix on my own. And then we have to open ourselves up to being told what to do. And that, in my opinion, that's what a higher power is for. That's what a sponsor is for. That is what having a healthy social network is for, is I have to learn how to let something tell me what to do. And for me, that was sponsorship, a higher power as I understand it, a social network of recovery. And I had to learn how to let them, through the principles, I think that's sort of the roadmap. And I had to let those things tell me what to do. And I had to finally disregard what I thought was good for me, and what I thought I needed to do about this problem. I had to finally accept that I just could not listen to what happened in my own head about how I needed to fix this problem. And I just needed to let those things tell me what to do. And I did everything my sponsor, Jay, told me to do. I followed all of his advice, which goes against my nature. And I started, trying to practice the principles of the program. I tried to, and I think this is so important. People talk about steps, and I love to talk about steps. But I think some people, their sponsor tells them to write about a step, and maybe they'll do some reading and writing about it, and they turn it in or they drop it or whatever, and they think, okay, and I'm ready to move on to the next one. And I'm not downplaying the importance of doing that work, but I think the steps happen when, as the days go by, we get a little bit better at practicing the principles that stand as the backbone of those steps. So you talked about step 4. In my mind, the principle of step 4 is honesty. So if I'm really working, step 4 is about inventory too, but it's about inventory because I've got to stare in the face, and I've got to look at that wreckage. I've got to look at all of those things that the disease has piled on top of my spirit. So to me, a measurement of the 4th step is how much more honest are you than you were when you came into recovery? Are you getting a little bit more honest as the days go by? And so I tried to focus on that. I've got to learn how to get more honest. I've got to learn how to get more accepting. I've got to learn how to have more courage. I've got to learn how to have more patience. And so I started to realize, as I got better with those principles, my wound started to close up. I firmly believe that as I eliminate character defects, as I take on the principles of recovery, that is the thing that closes up my wound. And it's the thing that clears all that debris off. My love, the love that's in my heart was always there. The goodness in my spirit was always there. The principles of recovery and the steps and the sponsorship and the social element of it are the thing that allowed me to do the work that let those things come to the surface. And the more that stuff starts to come to the surface, the less empty I feel. And the most important thing about that is the less empty I feel, the less drugs and alcohol have to offer me. Learning how to not use is a superficial solution to this problem. Doing the work that eradicates the desire to use is what I need to be focusing on.
Right. It's learning how to live.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's what recovery is. Recovery is, and there's a lot of different ways to describe it. A straightforward way is that my life was unmanageable. Didn't know how to live. Stress, anxiety, the world just overcame me. Just couldn't adjust, couldn't handle it, couldn't deal with it, at least not without getting crazy and angry and so on and so forth. So I take drugs and alcohol. Suddenly life is okay. That creates all kinds of problems. Take that away, can't live all over again. That's step one stuff, powerless and unmanageability. And so if I'm going to recover, then, okay, alcohol, drugs have been taken away. How do I live? How do I deal with a life that used to be unmanageable? And it's just as you said, and it begins with taking instruction. And, I remember the epiphany that I had that number one, I don't have to be ruled by what my mind tells me to do. So I would wake up,
absolutely,
and I know there's people out there who know this feeling. They wake up and they're like, I don't want to drink ever again. I'm done. Like, this is it. This is ridiculous. I'm spending too much money. I'm ruining my health. My relationships are in shambles. Like I'm in a lot of pain. This is immature. Like, I need to quit. I need to stop. This is killing me. And then noon, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, another voice pops up and says, I want to drink. And we go, oh, I guess I got to drink, because the voice in my head said I got to drink. And when I realized, like, wait a minute, like, I don't have to do what that voice says. Like, I can have the thought, I need to go have a drink, and I can just say, okay, like, I hear your thought, but you don't control me, which was just revolutionary. And now I live every day of my life. My mind tells me all kinds of crazy stuff, and like, I ignore half of it. It doesn't stop. That's important to know, that like some, crazy thoughts won't stop. You won't stop getting nutty ideas, but I don't act on them. I don't have to act on them, and I don't have to be stressed out over them. Another thing is the power of having other people. And this is why it's so important. So I know there's some people who get into recovery, they want to stop drinking. They just want to come around recovery enough and sniff it out and research it enough to kind of get the gist and take it home and do it on their own. Like, what's this kind of thing all about? How does it work? Like, what is addiction really? What is recovery really? What are these steps all about? Okay, I think I got it. Okay, I'm going to go home and work on it. Mm-hmm. And like, man, the community is kind of the whole deal. The community, there's no doing the stuff without the community. And part of the advantage of having that community is that I have people to run my thoughts past.
Absolutely.
And ideas that I have that I'm solid, it's a good idea. But it's like, I also thought it was a good idea to drink myself half to death. So, just for kicks, I'm going to run this past my buddy Aaron. Hey, man, like, I had this thought. What do you think? And you very lovingly could say things like, well, Joe, I've known you for a few years, and this is what I know about you. And from the outside, it looks like, even though you might think you have good motivations, it could be that you want to do this because of X, Y, and Z. And I'd be like, oh, man, I didn't think about that. Because, I live in denial sometimes about stuff. Or you could say, yeah, I've had that thought before. And let me tell you, I acted on it, and it blew up in my face. And this is what happened to me. So that might be your situation. Maybe you don't want to do it. Or I had that thought, somebody told me not to. I'm glad I didn't, because it turns out it was really this. I remember when I was 2 years sober, and all of a sudden I decided I wanted a new sponsor. I was like, you know what? I know people change sponsors. I think I need a new sponsor, And I'd start thinking of all these reasons why I needed a new sponsor. He wasn't pushing me hard enough, or I don't know. I don't even remember now. But I just know that I needed a new sponsor.
Right.
And I thought, I should probably run that past some people. Not my sponsor, because that I could have saved myself a whole lot of time just by doing that. I didn't. I went by everyone else. And most people are like, well, whatever. Sometimes you got to change sponsors. And finally I came to somebody, is my uncle, and he'd been sober for 30-something years, and he said, there's something I know about you. I've heard you say, and I've observed, and that is you like to change things up every now and then. You get a little restless when people start to get to know you, and so you start to go to new meetings, you start meeting new people. Every couple of years you get a new job, every couple of years you move to a new house or a new town. Like, I think that you start to get restless after a period of time because people are really starting to get to know you. Your ability to control people's thoughts about you, and control people's perception of you starts to slip, and you start to lose control of that, and you want to change it up so you can get control again, and you can put that distance, because I remember he said this, it's hard to catch a moving target. And I was like, man, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I couldn't see it, but when he said it, I knew that's what it was, and my desire, my itch to change sponsors just dissipated.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. And now I know that about myself, and now every 2 years, sure enough, I start to feel itchy about, 2 years into anything, a job, whatever. And I go, yeah, that's just that part of me. But that's the advantage of having the community, because we can't trust our own thinking. And even if you can, you don't have to, just run it past other people just for the fun of it. At the very least, you'll get some good perspective. But a lot of times you'll get really good direction and avoidance of pitfalls.
I think that's one of the primary functions of having a social network in recovery, because the disease voice that lives in my head can be really clever. Mm-hmm. And, we know what step 3 tells us. We're trying to exercise, the principle of discernment and trying to follow the will of my higher power versus self-will.
What, and to say the third step again? Just for anyone that doesn't know it off the top of their head.
Made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. Mm. And so, it's a tricky thing trying to figure out, okay, I'm at a fork in the road. I can either go left or I can go right. Now, which one is God's will and which one is my will? And so the disease voice can be so tricky, because it can convince me that the way I really want to go is God's will. Mm-hmm. And I have no way of figuring that out unless I run it by someone else and say, you know what, man, I'm faced with this decision, and I keep thinking that this is the thing that I should do. Am I looking at this thing correctly, or is that really just self-will masquerading as God's will? And it's a tricky thing, and we cannot figure that out on our own. I mean, it's something that we have to have a healthy, we got to surround ourselves with people who have what we want and who we trust and who are living the kind of lives that we want to live, and let them help direct us in our lives. Mm-hmm. I mean, we need help making decisions. The way we make decisions with our broken instruments up here brings us nothing but grief and heartache. And we have to learn how to let something help us make choices. And, what helps us make choices in recovery? Well, there's lots of different things that contribute to that, but we have to have help. I know this. If I were to go back to making choices the way I did before I got into recovery, my life would fall apart. To a certain degree, we all hear that voice that says, I'm about to do this. I have to make a decision. This is the right thing. This is what I should do. And that's the wrong thing. And I think that what happens to addicts and alcoholics over time is, once you turn a deaf ear to that voice, the voice that steers you, you can call it the Spirit, you can call it the voice of God, you can call it just the voice is what I call it. But once you turn a deaf ear to that voice long enough, the voice grows ever so faint until you just don't even hear it anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the literature is describing when it says self-will run riot. I think that's us having turned a deaf ear to the voice within so long that it's so faint that it just doesn't show up in our lives anymore. And so I think in recovery, we slowly, through principles, start to hear that voice a little bit and take heed to it and follow its direction with the help of a sponsor and with the help of, a healthy social network and people that we trust. And so the great thing and the thing that gives us hope is the thing that caused that voice to fall silent is the principle that caused it to fall silent is the very same principle that can wake it up again. How did it fall silent? Well, we stopped listening to it so long that it fell silent. Well, how do we get it to speak louder? Well, we do what it says. One decision at a time in recovery. We let principle guide us. We let people in our network and our social network guide us. And then eventually doing the right thing just becomes easier and easier until, I think, nobody does this perfectly, and I don't claim, please don't confuse this. I don't do this perfectly. But doing the right thing is so much easier for me now than it was in the beginning. 1 year or even 2 years or even 3 years. because I listen to that voice so consistently that now it speaks much more loudly inside of me. And so, that's how I can describe step 3 for me.
And it won't leave you. It won't leave you alone if you ignore it or disobey it.
Oh no. And so, that conviction is a good thing. I want to feel convicted when I harm another human being. It doesn't matter how many years in recovery I get, I still make mistakes and I still harm people. And I think that's why there's a real powerful differentiation or delineation between guilt and shame. I think guilt is feeling bad for what I did, and I think shame is feeling bad about who I am. Mm-hmm. And that sort of touches on kind of what you were talking about earlier. Yeah, absolutely. Even though the voice might speak really loudly, the voice of my spirit or the voice of what's right or the voice of God within, every now and then, because I'm human, I fail. Mm-hmm. And you're going to know about it. The voice within is going to let you know when you mess up, and that's not a bad thing. And, it's an interesting thing to think about. Every time I hear that voice and I turn a deaf ear to it, I think it injures me in some way. When I face a decision and I either have the right thing or the thing that I want, and I think every time I do the thing that I want and I fail to do the right thing, I think it injures my spirit in some way. And a lot of times it's undetectable to me. It's just like, Archimedes Principle or the principle of displacement. If I carry a rock, as big as my hand up to the ocean, and I throw that rock in the ocean, because of the principle of displacement, I know by some tiny immeasurable fraction, the water rose a little bit. It had to. How can you ever measure that? No. You'll never measure how much. Get your ruler out. How much did the ocean rise because I threw a rock in it? Well, no. And I think every time we're faced with a decision or we hear the voice of our spirit or the voice of God within, and then we hear the voice of our disease or the voice of selfishness or self-will, and we act out on self-will, we're throwing another rock into the ocean. Mm-hmm. And our wound grows a little bit bigger. And I think that's why, this thing is so progressive the way it is, and I think it's why the disease ends up sort of owning us in the end. And because the more we act out on self and the more we deny that voice, the larger our wound grows, and then the larger my wound grows, my desire to use just continues to grow right along with it. That makes every little decision we make so important, because every time I have a decision to make, whether big or small, I have a chance to either feed my spirit or injure it.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
The community that we build up around us, I think, is so instrumental because, left to my own devices, it's clear where I end up. So in the process of making all those better decisions, which is a lifelong journey, and it's not an easy journey. Like, I'm going to need fellow travelers. And it's amazing how graceful or gracious the program is in that, so I need something and I can go to someone and get some help, and they can give me their advice or their direction or their experience or whatever. Sometimes I need help and other people come to me for help. And in the process of me trying to help them, it's like a big highlighter on the solution to my problem. So I can get help for what I'm facing, either by going to Aaron and saying, hey, I'm struggling with this, Aaron, what do you think? And you can give me some advice. Or I can just be struggling with something and you come to me. And sure enough, I can't tell you how many times this has happened. You asked me for advice or direction on something that's going on in your life, and it happens to illuminate exactly what's going on in mine, and it's like it's clear when I'm giving you, and I go, wait a minute, that's advice I should probably take, for myself, and I've gotten the answer I was looking for.
There's certainly a reciprocity that comes with this. I think something happens in that interaction that increases our level of connectedness. The disease of addiction is certainly a disease of isolation. It's a disease of loneliness, and something happens in that interaction where I'm helping you you're helping me. And through that shared experience, the connectivity between us grows. And, I firmly believe that my desire to use and my connectivity are inversely proportional. As I continue to increase the level of my connectedness to myself, to other human beings, to the world around me, my desire to use becomes weakened by that experience. And I believe that firmly. I've seen it be true in my own life, and I've watched it be true in other people's lives as well.
So tell me, how do you? And this might sound like a non sequitur, but
okay.
in my mind, this all fits.
Okay.
I promise you. So tell
It's
me
all
how
connected.
Tell me how you work steps 6 and 7, because I hear a lot of issues about letting go of character defects and improvement of character and the installation of habits and so forth.
Yeah. 6 and 7 are tricky steps. To me, it's about awareness. I cannot eradicate something that I don't know about. And I can't fix something that I don't know is broken. So, in the 4th step, and we're identifying all of that wreckage, all of the ways my disease has showed up in my life that are not me, as you so eloquently stated earlier. And so now that I've identified those things, now I'm aware of how I'm dishonest and how I manipulate and how I try to, as you were talking about, as how I control people. 6 and 7, and I'm certainly not downplaying the power of prayer, but I don't think we can sit around and pray for to me, 6 and 7 are really our action steps. I mean, I'm not saying that prayer can't help us, but I think that if we sit around and just pray to be more honest, but we don't try to develop, the awareness and the kind of work ethic that eradicates our dishonesty, then we're probably not going to get more honest. So I think it begins with awareness, and then I think it has to be intentional, I think, for example, dishonesty is the most glaring character defect of any addict alcoholic. I mean, it's essential. The disease really molds us into fictional characters. And we come into recovery and we don't know anything about ourselves, most of us. If we ever did, we forgot it. Some of us never knew anything about ourselves. And so I think, the awareness of all of the ways the disease manifests itself in our life shows up in 6 and 7 when we realize those things and we make an intentional, deliberate effort to get better in those areas. And so one of the things that I do is, on 6 and 7 is, I'll concentrate on a specific principle, like honesty or like patience or like courage. And, meditate on that principle. I think when we bring a principle, a specific principle, into our conscious mind, simply, and this is kind of where prayer comes in my opinion, simply the act of a focused intention and thinking about and bringing it into your conscience. Today, I want to be honest, okay? And every day you meditate or pray on the principle of honesty and bring that into the forefront of your consciousness. Later on that day, because we all know that dishonesty comes from a deep place inside of us. Okay? We can feel a lie welling up from some deep place within. You know, it's not like it just falls off the end of your tongue. No, it comes from some place deep inside of you. And so sometimes, you feel that lie starting to surface, or a situation where you want to be dishonest and you want to exaggerate something or something like that. And then because of your intentional focus on honesty, it pops into your head at that moment. No, today I'm focusing on honesty. And you allow yourself to take that lie or that exaggeration as it starts to find its way up and push it back down again. And I mean, you can use any principle you want to, but I mean, to me, that's what 6 and 7 is. It's the process by which my goodness is brought to the surface through intentional and focused and deliberate effort to embody what the principles are. Because, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that So if I'm concentrating on, meditating on honesty every day, and then I feel the lie welling up, but because my mind has been primed to think about honesty, I have the presence of mind to kind of, push it down and repress it. But I also have the space to now ask a deeper question, which is, why in the world did I want to lie about that anyway? I wanted to impress somebody because I have low self-esteem, or because I'm full of fear, because if the truth comes out, I'm going to lose my security, or again, people are not going to like me, self-esteem issue, or the relationship that I'm in is threatened. Like it gives us the ability to ask another question. Whereas if the lie just pops out, it just pops out. And then if I notice it later, I'll be like, why did I even say that? But then I'm focusing on, I got to cover up and keep the lie going or whatever. But
I hadn't thought about it like that before. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So I think there's always something underneath, the behavior.
Absolutely, because most addicts. Why do we create a fictional character in the first place? It's because the reality about us is so uncomfortable for us that rather than be who I am and wear this face around, I'm gonna invent another face. And I think that's absolutely true. And I don't think we get honest in recovery. Nobody's perfectly honest, but I don't think we get to a high level of honesty until we learn how to connect with ourselves. And that means trying to take off all of those fictional characters, that fabricated version that the disease put in place, and take all that stuff off and say, okay, I'm going to allow myself to see make contact with what my face really looks like, and then allow that to interact into the world. Let other people see it.
And I tell you what, man, like that has got to be the hardest thing in the world to do.
Yeah.
Because
for people like us.
Yeah, absolutely. But the tragic irony, or maybe you could say it's the tragic irony, or you could say that it's like the wonderful good news, is that like the real you, whoever you are out there, like the real you is beautiful. Like you just got to let it out. And the way you have to let it out is to go through all of this discomfort of dealing with your character defects and letting them go, and trusting that you're not going to be dropped as you let go of these things that you've been hanging on to, for dear life to kind of get you through. So for example, a character defect might be, lying, and you're using those lies to kind of help you navigate through life by embellishing or whatever. Or a character defect, could be, a certain tendency to shut people off because you don't want them to get too close because you don't want to get hurt. And as you let those things go, you're trusting that you're not going to experience whatever it was that you were using those character defects to avoid. But through that trusting process, which is very uncomfortable, you come to discover the real you. And the beautiful thing is, like, the real you is beautiful. Like I've seen it happen in recovery. These people just bloom and blossom, and it's like, wow, like that's amazing. So, if you haven't let go of those character defects yet, like, let go, come on in, the water's fine, like you're going to be all right.
As a matter of fact, that's where freedom lives. I remember I said something one time and you laughed at me, but I said addicts are allergic to reality.
Yes.
And, we couldn't let this podcast go by without repeating that, but addicts are allergic to reality, and everything they do is about avoiding reality. The dishonesty, the manipulation, the attempts to control others. Drug use and alcohol use itself is an attempt to avoid reality. And so I think that what's the ultimate utility of recovery? Well, we use the program, we use the principles, we use the fellowship, we use developing a relationship with something greater than us to create a reality that we can accept. And I think, travel the road. And so those of you who are out there listening, this is a hope shot. So travel that road long enough to wake up one day and shake off a night's sleep. Look in the mirror and see your real face standing there, and be living in a reality that you find acceptable. Hey, you know what? Being who I am in this life, in this moment, is pretty good. And I think that's as far away as any of us will ever get from the desire to use. you've taken away what drugs and alcohol have to offer you. I mean, if you live in a reality that you can accept, then escape is not necessary. And so drugs become something that have nothing to offer you. And that's as far away as we'll ever be from the desire to use.
Yeah, allergic to reality. I remember when I heard that, I thought that was one of the coolest things I've ever heard. And I even said, I'm not into neck tattoos, but if I was,
Yes.
that's what I would get right here. Allergic to reality.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Please don't do that.
Those really aren't my style, but
No. I know it's a joke, but it's funny. But I mean, if every addict that I've ever known, every alcoholic I've ever known, was able to identify with that statement, we'll do anything possible, to avoid having to be who we are in this moment in our lives. Mm-hmm. And I think fundamentally, deep down where we live, we've always had a part of us that just did not feel right. I just did not feel comfortable in my own skin. I didn't like being who I was. And so, the disease of addiction took root. And I think when we do the work that frees us of that condition, then our wound really closes up to the point where, the obsession is relieved of its power. Like you were talking about earlier, in active addiction, you could have every sincere desire not to drink, and then all of a sudden the thought pops in your head, I'd like to have a drink. And the next thing you know, the disease is driving you to the liquor store against your will. Against your will. And I think that, the work we do is the thing that reduces the power of that obsession so it cannot take hold of us and control us the way it used to. And thank God, I mean, isn't this an interesting thing? Addicts are defiant by their very nature, but they suffer from a disease that tells them everything to do every minute of every day. What to think, who to hang around, where to go, and in the end, who to be. Yet we're defiant.
Yeah, why can't we be rebellious against that?
Well, when you
there's an answer for it.
Well, yeah, when you gain some perspective on it, it kind of pisses me off to think about how much the disease used to own me, and that motivates me. Like, oh, never let that thing own me like that again. Tell me what to do like that again. Seriously.
I think defiance and spite can work in the short run in recovery because when I started doing the steps. And I will freely share this with anybody. I was in the middle of a lie, number one. I had been telling my sponsor I was about coming on 3 months sober, and I was like 0 days sober when I told him that. And we started the steps 2 days sober, and telling him I was 3 months. So that was a big lie. Number two, I didn't understand how the steps work. Like I didn't get it. I looked at them, tried to understand them, and I couldn't figure it out. And so I didn't get it. And because I didn't get it, I didn't want to do them. Then I did not believe that they would work because I'm very complicated, right? And there's no way I'm going to accept that a free program written in 12 steps that they hang on the walls of treatment centers and homeless shelters that smell like urine is going to fix somebody as complicated as me. Like my therapy is going to be like $300 an hour therapy, whatever it is. And I just didn't want to do it. So the reason I did it, and I promise you this is the truth, is because I did not want to think that people were going to stand around my grave and say, if only he worked the steps, he'd be here today. If only he would have prayed to God, he'd be here today. I thought, no way, man. I'm going to do the steps, and I'm going to pray. Then I'm going to die, and then everyone's going to know how unique I was. So I started the steps in a lie, not knowing how they work, not believing they work, not wanting to do them, and I did them for spite. I did them to prove they don't work and to prove how unique I was. And they worked. That's the good news, man. They don't care why you do them. They don't care if you understand them. If you do them, they work.
They work. And, that's also a message of hope, too, to anybody that might be listening. I mean, the thing about it is some people think, okay, I do all this work, but still it's like a crapshoot, like a game of dice on whether it works or not. Like So I'm going to do all the things that are suggested. I'm going to get a sponsor and work steps and go to meetings and develop a healthy social network in recovery, and then actively participate in serving others. And then maybe I'll get better. No.
You will.
You will get better. So maybe somebody out there needs to hear that today.
Yeah.
Okay. This is not a game of Russian roulette. Okay. If you do this work, you will get better, and your wound will begin to close up, and you will slowly gain freedom from the desire to use and drink. I believe that with every fiber of my humanity. I really do.
And there are people who will say, 12 steps is not the only way. It's not for everyone. There's other ways to get sober. And to be perfectly honest, maybe. I don't know. I mean, how could I don't know everyone in the universe. I don't know everything that's ever been tried or ever will be tried. Maybe there are a lot of ways to get sober. Maybe it isn't for everyone. I don't know. But there is one thing that is said that is not true. And that is that there are people, what is not true is that people will say, I went to AA and then I experienced that it did not work, and so I left. And what I want to correct and say is, no, you went to meetings, and going to meetings by itself rarely works, if at all, at least for people like me. However, you did not try the steps, you did not get a sponsor, you did not do the program. Our claim is that if you do the program, rarely have we seen a person fail, who's thoroughly followed the path. So, if you've gone to a meeting before and then you go home and you got drunk and you went back to a meeting and then you got drunk and you went back to a meeting and you got drunk, don't conclude that the program doesn't work. Try the program, try the steps. And just like you said, man, if you go to meetings, get a group, get a sponsor, work the steps, try to help others, get down on your knees and pray to your higher power to keep you sober and thank the higher power at the end of the day for keeping you sober. I've yet to, maybe it's possible to do that stuff and it doesn't work. I've yet to find that person. And the only people that do get drunk that have done that stop doing that for a period of time.
That's right. And that's an important point because, it doesn't matter what place, what destination you arrive at in recovery, you cannot afford to get complacent. And because, the size of that wound is inversely proportional to your level of connection. So as you connect, the wound grows smaller. But if you disconnect, the wound opens up again. And that everything that I know about recovery, everything I've seen in my own life, everything I've witnessed in other people's lives solidifies the truth of that statement. So that means we never can get complacent. We never can rest. We always have to continue to try to get better every day. Just implement principles into our lives just a little bit more as the days go by. Even when things get better, work that much harder. I've seen that be true. And understanding that motivates me to continue to do this work. It really does.
Awesome.
I got a question for you.
Yes. All right.
I'll flip the script on you.
Do it.
All right. So I just think this might be important for somebody who might be listening to hear this message today. So a lot of people find it to be almost impossible to imagine being able to find gratitude in having suffered from this disease. I know, and even myself, there's a lot of people I'm not grateful to be an addict. If I could go back and change it, I'd just be a normal person who could go into Applebee's and have a couple of beers and go home. So what do you think about that statement? Can I find gratitude in having suffered from this disease? And if so, where do I find it?
Well, the answer is yes, absolutely. I find gratitude in being an addict and an alcoholic because if I could play a thought experiment where there is the life I have lived and am living in a parallel life a hypothetical parallel life in which I never had the disease of alcoholism, never even maybe ever had a drink, and just lived this normal life, like a lot of people, like probably most people do. I can only take that thought experiment so far because I don't really know everything that's happening along that line. But I can tell you that if I had the choice to jump from this one to that one, I would stay on this one. Because from what I experience today, what I get personally out of recovery, right? So I don't use drugs and alcohol anymore, so I don't suffer from hangovers and, the threat of wrecking my car. Okay, that's kind of the smallest benefit. It's an important benefit,
Right.
but it's the smallest benefit in the grand scheme of things. What I get out of this life of recovery is a personal connection with my higher power. And you don't have to be religious to experience that. And that is my experience, because I was not religious for the first couple of years of my sobriety. I had a connection with a greater transcendent power beyond me that gave me purpose. And that is exhilarating. So I have that. I have people who know me and know me before they even know me, they know me. I walk into a meeting and I see other people who I have never met before, but by virtue of the fact that we are in that room together for the same reason, talking about the same stuff, I can assume immediately that they know certain things about me that are very, very important. And I know things about them that are very, very important. And on that level, we can connect in a way that I can't connect anywhere else in the world, which is also life-giving. So I have that community. I have a tremendous amount of fun, and I have kind of like a superpower. Not only, so get this, man, like by virtue of being an alcoholic, right? I have a superpower to do something that other people should be able to do but can't. So, imagine that two people are standing at the Grand Canyon, man and wife, and she falls off the cliff. There's no one on earth that loves this woman more than this man. He does not have the power to jump in the canyon and swoop down and save her. He should, because he loves her so much, but he doesn't, because he doesn't have the ability to fly. Okay? You have people who are dying of this disease, addicts and alcoholics, who have mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and husbands and wives and sons and daughters and friends, loved ones that are, like through blood and DNA and experience connected and bonded to them in ways that I could never understand, who love them more than could ever be expressed, and they can't help them. Can't do it. Could pour their lives into trying to help this. And a lot of people do. They try to help this person with every breath, and they sit up at night and they sit by the phone and they wait for the phone call they hope never comes, and they bail them out of jail and they take them to treatment and they have them revive back to life again and again. And they're just driven insane trying to keep this person alive, and they don't have the power to do it. Now, I don't have the power of life or death, but I do have a superpower to deliver something that can save their life. I've been where they have been. And by virtue of being where they have been, I have the ability to do something no one else can do. And that's break the wall of isolation. I can break that thing that keeps out even the people that love them most, despite their will. Right? The person that's dying doesn't want the people that love them most to be locked out of their lives. But despite their will, there is a wall that cannot be penetrated except by another alcoholic or addict. And I can break through that. And I can deliver a message. I can't save their life, but the message can. And the message can save their life if they're willing to pick it up. And it's like a superpower, man. Now, if God said, invent a purpose for your life, I couldn't come up with a better one than that.
That's beautiful.
I couldn't. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I'm grateful for that. Like, and
it's beautiful.
And life is tough, man. Like, life is full of suffering for everybody, alcoholic and not. And so, can you find gratitude in recovery? Hell, can you find gratitude in anything? I can, because I have recovery. The person that's just living the ho-hum life, can they find gratitude? I hope they can. If I was in their shoes, I hope I could. But I think everyone suffers. Everyone has the ability to suffer, and everyone has the ability to have gratitude. The difference is I got a program that teaches me how to have gratitude.
I think the way you describe that is when you first started describing it, sounded to me very different than the way I would. Of course, everybody's perspective on this is different. There's a lot of people that may be listening, or addicts and alcoholics out there that think, that's crazy. Look at all the pain that I've endured having suffered from this disease. Why would I ever be grateful for that? And I think we get something for our pain.
Yeah,
I think we do.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And when I sit here, and many nights and many drives down the road, how when you're driving, you can just kind of get lost in thought and your brain goes all these crazy places. But, I imagine to myself, where would I be right now if I hadn't suffered from this disease? Or who would I be? And what would I have? And what would my life be like? Because, before this disease took hold, I had all the ingredients to have a successful life. I was good grades. I played sports. I was popular, semi-popular in high school, semi-popular in high school. And I had promise, but of course the disease derailed all of that. And, it used to be sort of a deflating thought to think, man, I don't know where I'd be, but I'd probably, I'd have a nicer car and I'd have a nicer house and I'd have a better career and I'd be more established and my retirement would already be much bigger than it is now. And, I caught myself in that thought one day and I think, man, are you an idiot? Because maybe I would. Joey, maybe I would have a nicer car. Maybe I would have a nicer house. Maybe my career would be, whatever. But I'd still be empty on the inside. And I'd still be trying to use all of those material things and the prestige that comes with that fancy career and that nice house to take the place of real spirituality. And so I think almost, having suffered from this disease forced me to seek one of the most basic human needs, one of the most fundamental spiritual needs that we all have, and that is to learn how to connect to other human beings and myself and something bigger than me in a healthy way. And I think, having suffered from this disease forced me to do that. Would I have set myself up upon that journey if I hadn't had this disease? And my answer is probably no. So I'm so grateful to be on this journey. There's no greater show on earth than to be on this journey and to find purpose in your life and, to just, go to bed with a real soft pillow on most days thinking, I spent a lot of years wreaking havoc in the world and harming people and harming myself and just being, the producer of chaos and confusion in the world. And so, all of the moments now where I get to try to be a source of healing, to look for opportunities to be of service to other human beings, to be present in the people's lives whom I used, where once I was absent. Those are the things that, I find so much gratitude in. They give my life purpose and meaning that I never imagined it could have. So I'm grateful to be an alcoholic. And of course, I'm grateful to be on this side of it. I don't ever want to go back to the darkness and the brand of suffering that only we know.
And gratitude is such a good place to begin anything, to do anything. So. And I think that applies across the board. I know people who look at the world, and I'll just step outside of the conversation of recovery per se for a second and say they just look at the world and they go, oh, the world's coming apart, and they look at politics and they look at the environment or whatever. They're just looking at the world and they go, oh my gosh, it's all falling apart. And that becomes the place they operate out of. Now, maybe they're accurate. I mean, maybe the world is coming apart. Maybe there are things that need to be fixed. I'll give them that. But I think that starting from a place of bitterness, cynicism, anger, critique, those places don't have a lot of fuel. So you could look at your life and go, oh, I'm so mad at myself. I've been drinking. I've been ruining my life. I got to fix it all. I've tried that, and it might get me sober and straightened out for a couple weeks. But I tell you, that bitterness and that anger goes from being the way I was living. It'll start to turn into other things, whereas to start from gratitude and to say, okay, man, I've screwed up, but I'm sober today, and I have people who love me, and the people in the program will take me back, and they will show me the way, and I have not lost everything yet. I still have whatever it is that I have. Right. That is, it might sound like you're just kind of fooling yourself into feeling good, But actually, I think that gratitude becomes a wellspring of energy to propel you through whatever journey it is you need to take. And I think if people in this world looked at the world and said, okay, yeah, we got problems, man. We're divided. We could be doing a better job taking care of our people, taking care of the world, whatever. But let's be grateful for how far we've come. A few thousand years ago, a few hundred years ago, everyone woke up and they just tried to worry about how they were going to literally survive that day. They faced death every day, if not from starvation, from a neighboring tribe.
Right.
We don't deal with that anymore. Okay, we live in a civilized society. Global poverty rates have plummeted. Like, we've come so far. We still got a lot of, to go. Let's just start in that gratitude, and that will give us a new perspective, and it'll give us a lot of energy. I don't think it's a natural way of seeing the world, but alcoholics and addicts in recovery kind of see the world that way, or at least we have the capacity to see the world that way.
It's a gift. It's one of the gifts of recovery, and it's the gift of perspective. I agree totally.
And, it's all up here. Like, I could find $100 bill, when I was not in recovery, and I could go, great, somebody's going to try to steal it. Oh, great, $100 bill. Nobody breaks a $100 bill.
Yeah.
And now I lose a $100 bill, and it's like, oh, man, silly me, but somebody picked it up. By gosh, I hope they needed it. It's
right.
I don't need it to survive. Maybe somebody picked it up, and that's what's going to get their rent paid. That's what's going to get them their next meal. Maybe it's going to pay for some kids' clothes so they don't have to go to school with a hole in their shirt. Like, all right, whatever.
What you were talking about reminded me of something that happened to me just this last week. I was I don't know, probably driving too slow or something. I drive like an old man, I'm told. But I think, you drive for as many years as I did illegally without a license and stuff, you'll develop some real healthy driving skills, So I'm told I drive like an old man, and there was a guy that was behind me, and I guess I was going too slow for him, and he gave me some friendly hand gestures.
Right.
And I was like really upset about that. I was like, what's wrong with people, Then just a couple of days later, I was pulling a trailer behind my truck, and I was hauling my four-wheeler somewhere, and I had to pull over. I heard a noise, and I had to pull over and check on it. So I'm over on the side of the road, and this man and this woman pulled over and just offered to help me. Hey, man, is there anything we can do to help you? I mean, you need anything? And so I think it's human nature. And especially, it's certainly addict nature if it's not human nature, but I think it's a little bit of both. But, I mean, I can focus on that guy who did that, or I can focus on those people that offered to help me. The world is filled with both kinds. I think that's true. I mean, you can extend that out to so many different, examples of things in the world. But, man, there's goodness in the world. There's love in the world. There's beauty in the world. It's our job to see it. And
I think that, we could, just as we can be blind to the good stuff because we're so focused on the negative, that can totally flip, and we can become blind to the negative. And I know people like that. They're just so darn positive. I'm convinced, like, they just don't see it. They have no clue that there are people out there giving them the middle finger, and they just don't see it. Because their filter has been cleaned and recalibrated, and they're only focused on picking up the positivity and reflecting it.
That's God consciousness, I guess.
I think we can end it on that.
All right.
Amen,
Thanks,
brother.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Joe Pusateri.
Aaron Smallwood.
And we're living the sober life. Thank you. I'm not into neck tattoos, but if I was, that's what I would get right here. Allergic to reality.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Yeah.
Please don't do that. Those really aren't my style.